Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her brow as she finished mopping the floors of the downtown community center. At 42 years old, she had been working as a janitor for nearly 15 years, quietly going about her duties while life happened around her. Her small frame, standing barely 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing no more than 120 pounds, made her nearly invisible to most people who passed through the building's halls. The community center buzzed with activity every evening. Basketball games echoed from the gymnasium, while various classes and meetings filled the smaller rooms. Maria had seen it all over the years. Children learning to read, teenagers finding refuge from troubled homes, adults pursuing their dreams through night classes. She took pride in keeping their space clean and welcoming, even though few people ever acknowledged her presence. On this particular Tuesday evening in March, the atmosphere felt different. Word had spread throughout the neighborhood that Tommy "Thunder" Rodriguez, a professional heavyweight boxer, would be visiting the center. The local newspaper had run a story about his upcoming championship fight, and somehow the community center had convinced him to make an appearance to inspire the youth programs. Maria had heard the name before. Rodriguez was known for his aggressive fighting style and equally aggressive personality outside the ring. He stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 240 pounds of solid muscle. His reputation preceded him, not just for his boxing prowess, but for his tendency to belittle anyone he deemed weak or insignificant. As Maria continued her evening cleaning routine, she could hear the excitement building in the main hall. Teenagers who normally spent their evenings on street corners had shown up, hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous boxer. Community leaders buzzed around, making final preparations for the informal meet-and-greet session. The center's director, Mrs. Dr. Fresheld Patterson, approached Maria as she organized cleaning supplies in the storage closet.
Maria, I know you usually work quietly, but tonight might get a bit chaotic.
The boxer is supposed to arrive around 7, and we're expecting a good crowd. Just do your best to stay out of the way, okay?
Maria nodded politely, as she always did.
She had perfected the art of being present but invisible, working efficiently while others carried on with their lives. It was a skill born from years of being overlooked and underestimated. People saw her uniform, her mop bucket, her quiet demeanor, and assumed they knew everything about her. What they didn't know was that Maria Santos had once been Maria Vasquez, a name that carried weight in certain circles 20 years ago. But that life seemed like a distant dream now, buried beneath years of routine and responsibility. At exactly 7:15, Tommy Rodriguez strutted through the main entrance of the community center. His entourage followed behind, a manager, a trainer, and a photographer from the local newspaper. Rodriguez wore an expensive tracksuit that emphasized his massive build, and his swagger commanded attention from everyone in the room. The crowd that had gathered erupted in cheers and applause. Rodriguez basked in the attention, flexing his muscles and shadowboxing for the cameras. He was everything the media portrayed him to be: loud, confident, and overwhelming in his physical presence. "Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. I," Patterson announced over the microphone, "please welcome our special guest, Tommy Rodriguez." Rodriguez took the microphone with a grin that revealed gold-capped teeth.
Thank you, thank you!
"It's great to be here at this, what do you call this place again?" He laughed at his own joke and the crowd laughed along nervously. "Now I'm here to talk to you young people about strength, about power, about what it takes to be a champion." Rodriguez continued, his voice booming through the speakers. "You see, in this world, there are winners and there are losers. There are the strong and there are the weak. And if you want to survive out there, you better figure out which one you are real quick." Maria continued her work in the background, emptying trash bins and wiping down surfaces.
And nicer flesh.
She moved methodically, trying to be as unobtrusive as possible while the boxer held court in the center of the room.
"I've been fighting professionally for 8 years, Rodriguez boasted, and in that time I've learned that respect is earned through strength.
People don't respect you because you're nice or because you work hard. They respect you because you can back up your words with action. A young teenager raised his hand. "Mr. Josh Howe." "Rodriguez, what if someone isn't naturally big or strong? Can they still become successful?" Rodriguez laughed, a sound that carried more mockery than humor.
"Listen, kid, nature deals the cards.
Some people are born to be lions, others are born to be sheep. The sooner you accept which one you are, the better off you'll be."
As he spoke, Rodriguez's eyes scanned the room, taking in the faces of his audience. His gaze lingered on Maria for a moment as she quietly cleaned a nearby table.
Something about her presence seemed to amuse him. "Take this little lady here," Rodriguez said suddenly, pointing directly at Maria. "I bet she's been cleaning this place for years, right? Invisible, quiet, probably never caused a problem in her life." "That's what I'm talking about. She knows her place." The room fell uncomfortably silent. Maria felt every pair of eyes in the building turn toward her. Her hands gripped the cleaning cloth tighter, but she continued her work without looking up. "Come here," Rodriguez called out to her. "Don't be shy. Come on up here." Mrs. Patterson looked mortified. Several community members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Maria remained focused on her cleaning, hoping the attention would pass.
"I said come here," Rodriguez repeated, his voice taking on a more commanding tone.
"I want to make a point to these kids." Reluctantly, Maria set down her cleaning supplies and walked slowly toward where Rodriguez stood. The crowd parted to make way for her, and she found herself standing in a small circle with the boxer towering over her. The size difference was striking. Rodriguez stood nearly 14 inches taller than Maria, and his muscular frame made her look almost childlike in comparison. He grinned down at her with what appeared to be genuine amusement. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice now carrying a condescending sweetness. "Maria," she replied quietly, her eyes focused somewhere past his shoulder. "Maria." See, kids, Maria here understands something that a lot of people don't get. She understands that everyone has their role in life. Some people are meant to be in the spotlight, winning championships and making millions. Others are meant to clean up after them. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that, as long as everyone stays in their lane.
A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the audience. Rodriguez was clearly enjoying himself, using Maria as a prop for his philosophy about strength and weakness.
"Now, Maria, I'm curious," Rodriguez continued. "Have you ever thought about stepping outside your comfort zone? Maybe trying something a little more challenging than pushing a mop around?" Maria finally looked up at him, meeting his eyes for the first time. For just a moment, something flickered in her gaze, a flash of something that Rodriguez didn't recognize or understand. "I do what needs to be done," Maria said simply. Rodriguez laughed again. "That's what I like to hear. Practical, realistic. You know your limitations." Just inside Chapter 14. He turned back to address the crowd. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, people. You've got to know yourself. You've got to understand your capabilities and your limitations. What is the custom fate? Don't go around pretending to be something you're not."
He put a heavy hand on Maria's shoulder, and she visibly tensed under its weight.
I bet little Maria here has never thrown a punch in her life, have you, sweetheart? The question hung in the air. Maria remained silent, but something in her posture had changed.
Her shoulders straightened almost imperceptibly, and her breathing became more controlled.
"Cat got your tongue?"
Rodriguez pressed. "It's okay, honey. Violence isn't for everyone. Some people are fighters. Others clean up the gym after the fighters go home."
The crowd was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the display.
Several adults in the audience exchanged disapproving glances, but no one seemed willing to challenge the famous boxer directly. Rodriguez, emboldened by the lack of opposition, decided to push further.
Tell you what, Maria, since you're here, why don't you help me demonstrate something to these kids?
Nothing violent, of course. Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself.
He gestured toward a heavy punching bag that hung in one corner of the room, part of the center's small fitness area.
Why don't you go over there and show everyone what happens when someone who doesn't belong in a fighter's world tries to throw a punch? Mrs. Patterson finally found her voice.
Mr. Rodriguez, I don't think this is appropriate.
Maria's just trying to do her job. Rodriguez waved dismissively.
Oh, come on, it's all in good fun.
Besides, it's educational. These kids need to understand the difference between real strength and pretend strength.
He looked back down at Maria, his smile becoming more predatory. "What do you say, sweetheart?"
Give it a try? I promise I won't laugh too hard when you barely make the bag move. The room was dead silent now. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Maria stood perfectly still for what felt like an eternity. Her small hands clenched at her sides. Finally, she looked up at Rodriguez again. This time, her gaze was steady and unwavering. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll try." Rodriguez's grin widened. He was about to get exactly the entertainment he had been hoping for.
"Excellent. Everyone gather around."
"Let's watch Maria here. Show us what she's got." As the crowd reluctantly formed a circle around the punching bag, Rodriguez continued his commentary. "Now, kids, watch carefully. See how she approaches it? Notice the uncertainty in her movements? This is what happens when someone steps outside their natural element." Maria stood in front of the heavy bag, which swayed slightly on its chain. She was still dressed in her janitor's uniform, simple gray pants and a matching shirt with the community center's logo. Her work shoes had rubber soles designed for traction on wet floors, not athletic performance. Go ahead, Maria, Rodriguez encouraged with false enthusiasm. Give it your best shot. Don't worry about technique. Just swing away. Maria raised her small fists and positioned herself in front of the bag. The crowd watched in uncomfortable silence as she seemed to study the target before her.
Rodriguez, meanwhile, was already preparing his follow-up commentary. He had planned to use her inevitable weak attempt as a teaching moment about knowing one's place in the world.
In his mind, the gentle tap she would deliver to the bag would prove his point perfectly. What happened next would change everything.
Maria took a deep breath and stepped closer to the punching bag. The fluorescent lights of the community center cast long shadows across the floor, and the only sound was the gentle hum of the ventilation system.
Everyone in the room seemed frozen in anticipation, waiting for the spectacle that Tommy Rodriguez had orchestrated. What they witnessed instead left them speechless. Maria's right hand moved with lightning precision, connecting with the heavy bag in a sharp, controlled strike. The sound that echoed through the room wasn't the soft thud everyone expected. It was the sharp crack of a perfectly executed punch.
The 150-pound bag swung violently on its chain, the metal links straining under the sudden force. The silence that followed was deafening.
Rodriguez's confident smirk faltered as he stared at the still swaying bag. The crowd stood motionless, trying to process what they had just witnessed.
A few people blinked hard, as if they might have imagined the whole thing. That was...
Unexpected, Rodriguez said slowly, his voice lacking its earlier bravado. He looked at Maria with new eyes, noting details he had missed before. The way she had planted her feet, the rotation of her hips, the follow-through of her arm.
Where did you learn to do that? Maria stepped back from the bag, her expression unchanged.
I told you!
I do what needs to be done. But Rodriguez wasn't ready to let the moment pass. His ego, already bruised by the unexpected display, pushed him to regain control of the situation.
Lucky shot,
he declared, his voice rising to address the crowd.
Anyone can get lucky once. Technique matters, but power, real power, comes from size and training.
He moved to the punching bag himself, rolling his shoulders theatrically.
Let me show you what a real punch looks like. Without any warm-up or preparation, Rodriguez drove his massive fist into the bag. The impact was impressive. The bag swung in a wide arc, and the chain rattled loudly.
But those with trained eyes could see that despite his size advantage, the bag hadn't moved with any more force than when Maria had struck it.
Rodriguez turned back to the crowd with renewed confidence.
See the difference? That's what 8 years of professional training gets you. That's what real strength looks like. A voice from the back of the room cut through his self-congratulation. Actually, the bag moved about the same distance both times. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. It was Carlos Mendez, a former amateur boxer who now worked as a youth counselor at the center. He had been watching quietly from the back, but Maria's display had clearly caught his attention. Rodriguez's face darkened. What did you say? Carlos stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. I said the bag moved the same distance, maybe even a little further when she hit it.
And her form was textbook. Perfect hip rotation, proper foot positioning, clean follow-through.
You're crazy, Rodriguez snapped. Look at the size difference. Physics doesn't lie. You're right, Carlos agreed. Physics doesn't lie. And physics says that speed times proper technique can generate more force than size without proper form. The tension in the room was palpable. Rodriguez clearly felt his authority being challenged, and his response was predictable.
Okay, smart guy. If this little cleaning lady is so impressive, maybe she'd like to step into a real ring with a real fighter.
A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Mrs. Patterson immediately stepped forward.
That's completely inappropriate, Mr. Tip.
Rodriguez, Maria is not a fighter, and this has gone far enough. But Maria's voice cut quietly through the protests. It's all right, Mrs. Patterson. Everyone turned to look at her again. She stood perfectly calm in the center of the circle, seemingly unaffected by the escalating confrontation around her. Rodriguez's eyes lit up with opportunity.
Now we're talking!
You want to see the difference between real strength and beginner's luck? Let's make it interesting. He gestured toward the small boxing ring that occupied one corner of the center's gym area. It was primarily used for fitness classes, but it had regulation ropes and proper padding.
Just a friendly demonstration, Rodriguez continued, his voice taking on the tone of a carnival barker.
Nothing serious. Just a few minutes to show these kids what real training can accomplish. Carlos shook his head vigorously. This is insane. She could get seriously hurt. Rodriguez laughed. Come on, I'll take it easy on her. Just a little light sparring. Think of it as educational. Maria looked around the room, taking in the concerned faces of the community members, the excited expressions of some of the teenagers, and the calculating look in Rodriguez's eyes. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet that people had to strain to hear her.
I haven't been in a ring in 23 years. The statement hit the room like a thunderbolt. Rodriguez paused mid-gesture, and Carlos's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Even Mrs. Patterson looked shocked. What do you mean? Rodriguez asked slowly. Maria was quiet for a long moment, as if debating with herself about how much to reveal. When she finally spoke, her words were measured and careful. I used to box a long time ago, before I started working here. Before a lot of things, Carlos was the first to recover from the surprise.
You were a competitive boxer? For a while, Maria replied. But that was a different life.
I'm not that person anymore. Rodriguez, however, saw this revelation as validation rather than a warning. Well. The plot thickens. So you're not just some random cleaning lady after all. You've actually been in a ring before. His demeanor shifted again, becoming more aggressive and confident.
Even better.
Nah, I don't have to feel guilty about this. You know what you're getting into. Mr. Rodriguez, Mrs. Patterson interjected firmly. I cannot allow this to happen in our facility. The insurance liability alone. Oh, come on, Rodriguez interrupted. Where's your sense of adventure? Your cleaning lady here just admitted she's got some boxing experience. She threw one decent punch. Now I'm curious to see what else she's got. The crowd was murmuring now, some people arguing for calling the whole thing off, while others seemed genuinely intrigued by the unexpected turn of events. The teenagers in particular seemed caught up in the drama of the moment. Rodriguez sensed the shifting mood and pressed his advantage. Tell you what, we'll make it official. Just 3 2-minute rounds. Proper gloves, proper referee. Carlos here can officiate if he wants to make sure everything stays fair and safe. Carlos looked torn between fascination and concern. Maria, you don't have to do this. Don't let him pressure you into anything. Maria looked at Carlos with something that might have been appreciation. I know I don't have to, but maybe it's time. Time for what? Rodriguez demanded. Instead of answering directly, Maria turned to address Mrs. Patterson. If we do this, it stays here. No cameras, no social media, no newspaper stories. Just these people tonight. Mrs. Patterson looked helpless. Maria, I can't guarantee your safety. What if something happens? What if you get hurt? For the first time since the confrontation began, Maria smiled. Just a small upturn at the corners of her mouth, but it was the first genuine expression of emotion she had shown. Mrs. David sadly was, Where'd Patterson? I've been taking care of myself for a long time. I'll be fine. Rodriguez clapped his hands together loudly. It's settled then! Let's get this show on the road.
He turned to the crowd with renewed energy. Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to witness something special.
Professional heavyweight boxer versus whatever she turns out to be.
As people began rearranging chairs around the small boxing ring, Carlos approached Maria quietly.
Are you sure about this? He's got 8 inches and over 100 pounds on you. Professional training, professional conditioning. This isn't going to be like hitting a heavy bag. Maria nodded. I know exactly what he is, Carlos. The question is whether he knows what I am. And what are you? Maria began walking toward the makeshift changing area that Mrs. Patterson had hastily set up behind a partition. Someone who's been quiet for a very long time. As she disappeared behind the partition to change into borrowed workout clothes, the buzz of conversation filled the room. Rodriguez held court near the ring, shadowboxing and making predictions about how quickly the exhibition would end. He seemed to be feeding off the attention, growing more confident and boastful by the minute. I'll take it easy on her for the first round, he announced to anyone within earshot. Give her a chance to show whatever it is she thinks she can do. But this is going to be a masterclass in the difference between amateur experience and professional skill. Carlos, meanwhile, was quietly setting up the timer and making sure the borrowed gloves were properly fitted. He had found some old 16-ounce training gloves that would provide more protection than the smaller competition gloves, but he was still deeply concerned about the mismatch in size and weight. When Maria emerged from behind the partition, the room fell quiet again. She wore simple black shorts and a gray t-shirt, borrowed from the center's lost and found box. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her expression was focused in a way that nobody in the room had ever seen before. What struck people most was how she moved. Gone was the shuffling gait of a tired janitor at the end of a long shift. In its place was something fluid and controlled, economical and purposeful. She approached the ring like someone who belonged there.
Rodriguez watched her climb through the ropes with growing amusement. Look at that, folks. She's got some moves after all. This might actually be entertaining. Carlos approached both fighters in the center of the ring. Okay, listen carefully. This is supposed to be a friendly exhibition. Emphasis on friendly. I want clean punching only. No clinching. No rough stuff.
If either of you gets hurt, we stop immediately. Understood? Rodriguez nodded dismissively.
They are surprising dependencies on my count.
Sure. Whatever you say, ref. Maria simply nodded once, then moved to her corner. As she waited for the opening bell, she closed her eyes and took several slow, deep breaths. For just a moment, she let herself remember what it felt like to be someone else. Someone who belonged in this square circle of canvas and rope. The timer buzzed, signaling the start of round 1. Rodriguez came out fast, probably intending to end things quickly and decisively. He moved forward with the confidence of someone who had never doubted the outcome, his gloves raised high and his footwork heavy but effective.
Maria, by contrast, seemed to glide across the canvas.
She moved laterally, keeping distance, studying her opponent with the patience of someone who had learned to wait for the right moment. Rodriguez threw the first punch, a heavy right hand that cut through the air where Maria's head had been a split second before. She had slipped the punch with minimal movement, just enough to let it pass harmlessly by. "Stand still and fight," Rodriguez called out, already showing signs of frustration. But Maria continued to move, staying just out of range, her eyes never leaving Rodriguez's chest and shoulders. She was reading him, cataloging his timing, his rhythm, his tells. The crowd watched in fascination as the first minute passed without any significant contact. Rodriguez grew increasingly aggressive, throwing harder punches that found only empty air. Maria seemed content to let him chase her around the ring. Then, with about 30 seconds left in the round, something changed. Maria stopped retreating and instead stepped forward, inside one of Rodriguez's wild swings.
Her left hand flicked out in a short, sharp jab that caught him squarely on the nose.
The punch wasn't particularly hard, but it was perfectly timed and perfectly placed. Rodriguez's head snapped back, and for the first time since entering the ring, he looked genuinely surprised. The bell ended round 1 with Rodriguez standing in the center of the ring, touching his nose and staring at Maria with new respect and growing anger. Round 2 was about to begin, and everyone in the room could sense that something fundamental had just shifted. The 1-minute rest between rounds felt like an hour. Rodriguez sat heavily on the small stool in his corner. His trainer, who had been quietly confident just minutes earlier, now whispering urgent advice in his ear. The boxer's nose showed a slight redness where Maria's jab had connected. And more importantly, his demeanor had changed completely. In the opposite corner, Maria stood calmly, barely breathing hard. Carlos approached her with a concerned expression. "Maria, how are you feeling?"
"You're doing great, but he's going to come out much more aggressive in this round." "He doesn't like being shown up."
Maria nodded, her eyes still fixed on Rodriguez across the ring.
I know his type.
"All ego, no patience. He'll make mistakes now."
"You seem different," Carlos observed quietly. "In the ring, you're like a completely different person." For the first time since the match began, Maria looked directly at Carlos. "This is who I used to be, before everything else." The timer buzzed for round 2. Rodriguez came out like a man possessed. Gone was any pretense of taking it easy or treating this as a friendly exhibition. He stalked across the ring with bad intentions, his professional pride clearly wounded by that single, perfectly placed jab. "Now you're gonna see what real boxing looks like," he snarled as he advanced.
But if Rodriguez expected Maria to be intimidated by his change in attitude, he was quickly disappointed. Instead of retreating as she had in the first round, Maria moved forward to meet him in the center of the ring.
What followed was a display of boxing artistry that left the crowd speechless. Rodriguez threw a powerful left hook aimed at Maria's head. Instead of backing away, she ducked under it and stepped to her right, bringing her closer to Rodriguez rather than farther away. As his punch sailed over her head, she drove a short, sharp right hand into his ribs just below his left arm. The punch landed with a solid thump, and Rodriguez grunted in surprise. He immediately tried to grab Maria in a clinch, but she spun away from his embrace, her footwork keeping her just out of reach.
"What the hell?"
Rodriguez muttered, shaking his head. The crowd was beginning to lean forward in their seats. What they were witnessing was starting to look less like a mismatch and more like a chess match, one where Maria seemed to be thinking several moves ahead. Rodriguez, growing increasingly frustrated, decided to use his size advantage more aggressively. He began trying to pressure Maria against the ropes, using his longer reach to keep her trapped in corners where her mobility would be limited. For a moment, the strategy seemed to work.
Maria found herself backed against the ropes with Rodriguez looming over her, his gloves extended to prevent her from moving left or right.
"Got you now," Rodriguez said, cocking his right hand for what he clearly intended to be a fight-ending punch. What happened next would be talked about in the community center for years to come. As Rodriguez threw his Sunday punch, a massive overhand right with all his weight behind it, Maria seemed to simply disappear. She dropped low and slipped to her left, causing Rodriguez's glove to crash into the top rope where her head had been a fraction of a second before. The force of his own missed punch sent Rodriguez off balance, stumbling forward with his guard completely down.
Maria rose up smoothly and, with textbook precision, delivered a three-punch combination that caught Rodriguez on the chin, temple, and jaw in rapid succession. The punches weren't thrown with knockout power. Maria was still giving away significant weight and reach, but they were thrown with surgical precision.
Rodriguez's legs wobbled, and for a moment it looked like he might go down. Instead, he grabbed the ropes and held on, shaking his head violently to clear the cobwebs.
The crowd erupted. Shouts of amazement and encouragement filled the room as people realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. The janitor they had barely noticed for 15 years was systematically dismantling a professional heavyweight boxer.
"Time!"
Carlos called out, though there were still 30 seconds left in the round. He had seen enough to know that Rodriguez was in real trouble.
"Let's take a break."
Rodriguez stumbled to his corner, his face flushed with exertion and embarrassment.
His trainer was talking rapidly, but Rodriguez seemed to be having trouble focusing on the words. Maria returned to her corner with the same calm demeanor she had maintained throughout the evening.
Her breathing was still controlled, her eyes still focused. If anything, she seemed more relaxed now than she had been when the whole confrontation started. Carlos approached her again, this time with obvious amazement. "Maria, where on earth did you learn to box like that? That combination you just threw, that was professional-level technique." Maria was quiet for a moment, watching Rodriguez across the ring as his trainer worked to get him ready for the final round.
Use their protest to eventually use a trade to come to a new town.
When she spoke, her voice carried a weight of memory that hadn't been there before. "I was good once," she said simply. "Really good." How good? Maria hesitated, then seemed to make a decision about how much to reveal. Good enough to turn professional. Good enough to think I might have a chance at something bigger. What happened? The question hung in the air. Maria's expression grew distant, and for the first time since entering the ring, she looked every one of her 42 years.
Life happened.
Family happened. Responsibilities happened. She paused, then added quietly, and I got scared. Scared of what? Scared of who I was becoming. Scared of how much I loved it. Maria's voice dropped even lower. Scared that if I kept going down that path, I'd lose everything else that mattered.
Carlos was trying to process this information when the timer buzzed for the final round.
Rodriguez had recovered somewhat during the extended rest, and his trainer had clearly given him a new strategy. Instead of coming out aggressively, he began the round more cautiously, trying to use his reach advantage to keep Maria at a distance.
"This is a team at gray testing and damaging technology and mentals."
For the first minute of round 3, the pace slowed considerably. Rodriguez threw long, probing jabs while Maria circled patiently, looking for openings that weren't there. It seemed as though Rodriguez had finally learned to respect her abilities, but as the round progressed, Rodriguez's ego began to reassert itself. He started talking again, trying to get into Maria's head with a stream of insults and challenges.
"You got lucky in the last round," he said between combinations.
But luck runs out. This ends now. Maria didn't respond verbally, but something in her posture changed. Her stance widened slightly, and her hands dropped just a fraction of an inch. To an untrained eye, it might have looked like she was getting tired. But Carlos recognized the shift immediately. She was loading up for something big. Rodriguez saw what he thought was an opening, and committed to a massive right cross, putting all his weight behind the punch. It was exactly what Maria had been waiting for. She slipped the punch with minimal movement, letting it graze past her left ear. As Rodriguez's momentum carried him forward, she planted her right foot and drove her left hand upward in a perfect uppercut.
The punch caught Rodriguez flush on the chin, and his eyes rolled back in his head.
His massive frame swayed like a tree in a strong wind before crashing to the canvas with a thunderous impact that shook the entire ring.
The community center fell completely silent.
Rodriguez lay motionless on his back, his arms spread wide, completely unconscious. Carlos immediately jumped into the ring and knelt beside him, checking for signs of serious injury while Maria stood quietly in the neutral corner.
Call an ambulance, someone shouted from the crowd. No, Carlos said after checking Rodriguez's pulse and breathing.
He's okay, just knocked out cold. It took nearly 5 minutes for Rodriguez to regain consciousness.
When he finally sat up, blinking in confusion, the first thing he saw was Maria extending her hand to help him to his feet. Good fight, she said simply.
Rodriguez stared at her hand for a long moment, then looked around the ring as if seeing it for the first time. The reality of what had just happened was slowly sinking in. He had been knocked out by a woman half his size who cleaned floors for a living. Finally, he reached up and took her hand, allowing her to help pull him upright.
When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Who are you? Maria had already begun removing her gloves. I'm exactly who you thought I was, she replied. I clean this building. I take care of things. I do what needs to be done. But the boxing, where did you learn to fight like that? I told you. I used to box.
Rodriguez's trainer had climbed into the ring and was checking his fighter for signs of concussion. Finding none, he looked at Maria with something approaching awe.
Lady, I've been around boxing for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just did. You fought like you've been training professionally for decades.
I haven't touched gloves in 23 years, Maria replied as she climbed through the ropes to leave the ring. The crowd was still stunned into near silence, but as Maria made her way back toward the partition to change out of her borrowed clothes, a few people began to clap. The applause grew slowly at first, then built into a thunderous ovation that filled the entire community center. Maria paused at the edge of the ring and looked back at the faces surrounding her. Community members who had passed her in the hallways for years without really seeing her, teenagers who had dismissed her as just another invisible adult, and Tommy Rodriguez, who was still sitting on the canvas trying to piece together what had just happened to his carefully constructed image of strength and weakness. For just a moment, she allowed herself to remember what it felt like to be seen, to be recognized, to be acknowledged for who she really was. Beneath the uniform and the quiet demeanor. Then she disappeared behind the partition to change back into her janitor's clothes, leaving behind a room full of people who would never see her the same way again.
But the story wasn't over.
In fact, it was just beginning. In the days that followed the extraordinary events at the community center, Maria Santos found her carefully constructed world of invisibility completely shattered. Despite her request for no cameras or social media coverage, word of what had happened spread through the neighborhood like wildfire.
Within 48 hours, everyone in a 6-block radius had heard some version of the story about the janitor who knocked out a professional boxer.
Maria arrived at work the next morning to find a cluster of people waiting outside the community center, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. She slipped in through the maintenance entrance.
As she had done countless times before, but even that familiar routine felt different now.
The building itself seemed to hold the memory of what had transpired in its main hall. Patterson was waiting for her in the administrative office holding a cup of coffee and wearing an expression that mixed concern with amazement. Maria, we need to talk, she said gently.
I've been getting calls all morning. Reporters, boxing promoters, curious neighbors.
Everyone wants to know about you.
Maria hung up her jacket on the same hook she had used for 15 years and began gathering her cleaning supplies. I just want to do my job, Mrs. Keys.
Patterson, nothing has changed. But everything has changed, Mrs. Patterson replied. You knocked out a professional heavyweight boxer in front of 50 people. That's not something that just goes away. As if to prove her point, the phone on Mrs. Patterson's desk began ringing. Through the glass partition that separated the office from the main hallway, Maria could see several teenagers pressed against the windows, trying to peer inside. Maria sighed and set down her mop bucket. What do you want to know?
Mrs. Duggs.
Patterson studied her for a long moment. I want to know why someone with your abilities has been cleaning floors for 15 years when she could have been doing something extraordinary with her life.
The question hung in the air between them.
Maria had been dreading this moment, the moment when her past would have to be reconciled with her present, when the careful walls she had built around her identity would have to come down.
Because cleaning floors is honest work, Maria said finally.
Because it pays the bills. Because it doesn't ask questions or make demands or require me to be someone I'm not sure I want to be. But boxing clearly means something to you. The way you moved in that ring, that wasn't just muscle memory.
That was passion.
Maria was quiet for a long time, watching the teenagers outside gradually lose interest and wander away.
When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of decades of buried dreams. When I was 20, I thought I was going to be a champion. I had the talent, I had the drive, I had coaches telling me I could go all the way.
I won my first 12 professional fights, 11 by knockout. Sports writers were calling me the next big thing in women's boxing. Mrs. Patterson leaned forward, captivated. What happened? I got pregnant? The words came out simply, without drama or regret. My boyfriend at the time, he wasn't ready to be a father. He disappeared before my daughter was born. Suddenly I had a choice to make. Pursue my boxing career or raise my child. You chose your daughter.
I chose my daughter.
And I've never regretted that choice. Not for a single day. Maria's voice grew stronger. Carmen is 22 now.
She's a nurse, married to a good man, living a life I could never have given her if I'd kept fighting. Every sacrifice was worth it. Mrs. Patterson nodded thoughtfully. But now Carmen is grown up. She doesn't need you to sacrifice your dreams anymore. My dreams died a long time ago, Mrs.
Patterson. What happened last night was just muscle memory. An old reflex that got triggered.
Before Mrs. Patterson could respond, there was a knock at the office door. Carlos Mendez entered, holding a newspaper and wearing a grin that stretched from ear to ear. Maria, you're famous, he announced, holding up the sports section of the local paper. The headline read, Mystery Woman Knocks Out Pro Boxer. Local janitor's secret past revealed. Maria stared at the newspaper with horror.
They promised no publicity.
Rodriguez agreed to keep this quiet. Carlos shook his head. Rodriguez didn't talk to them, but someone at the fight did. The story's pretty accurate. They even got quotes from some of the kids who were there. Maria sank into a chair, realizing that her quiet life was officially over.
What does the article say? It says you used to fight professionally under the name Maria Lightning Vasquez. It says you retired undefeated with a 1-2-0 record, all but one ending in knockouts.
It says you disappeared from boxing completely in 2003, and no one knew what happened to you until last night.
The name hit Maria like a physical blow.
She hadn't heard Lightning Vasquez spoken aloud in over 20 years. For a moment, she was transported back to a different time, when that name had been announced over loudspeakers in boxing arenas, when crowds had chanted it, when it had represented everything she thought she wanted from life. The reporter did some digging, Carlos continued. Found your old trainer, some of your former opponents. They all said the same thing. You were the most naturally gifted fighter they'd ever seen. Your trainer said you could have been a world champion if you hadn't walked away. Mrs. Patterson was studying Maria's face carefully.
Is it true? Were you really that good?
Maria stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the community center's parking lot where she had swept up countless pieces of litter over the years.
I was good enough to believe my own hype. Good enough to think that boxing was the only thing that mattered.
Good enough to almost lose sight of what was really important.
But you didn't lose sight of it, Carlos pointed out.
You made the hard choice. You put your family first.
And I'd make the same choice again, Maria said firmly. But that doesn't change the fact that my quiet life is over now. As if to emphasize her point, the phone rang again.
Mrs. Patterson answered. It spoke briefly, then hung up with a strange expression on her face.
That was someone from HBO Sports. They want to interview you for a documentary about women in boxing.
Maria closed her eyes and leaned against the window. This is exactly what I was afraid of.
But Carlos wasn't ready to let her retreat into despair.
Maria, what if this is an opportunity? What if this is a chance to inspire other people, other women who think they have to choose between their dreams and their families? I'm 42 years old, Carlos.
My fighting days are over. Your fighting days might be over, but your story isn't.
Do you realize how many young women could be inspired by hearing about a single mother who gave up a boxing career to raise her daughter, then came back 23 years later to show she still had it? Maria turned away from the window to face both of them.
What are you suggesting?
Patterson spoke up. I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to stop hiding. Maybe it's time to let Maria Vasquez and Maria Santos be the same person.
And what does that look like, practically speaking? Carlos had clearly been thinking about this.
It could look like a lot of things. You could train young fighters. You could speak at schools about making tough choices. You could work with programs for single mothers.
Or, he paused dramatically.
You could fight again. Carlos, I'm 42 years old.
I haven't trained seriously in over 2 decades. I clean buildings for a living. You just knocked out a professional heavyweight boxer, Carlos pointed out. In front of 50 witnesses.
I don't think age or ring rust is your biggest limitation. Over the next several weeks, Maria's life transformed in ways she never could have anticipated. The story of her knockout of Tommy Rodriguez had spread far beyond the local newspaper. Boxing websites picked it up, then sports networks, then mainstream media outlets fascinated by the human interest angle. Interview requests poured in from around the country. Promoters called with offers to stage comeback fights. Publishers wanted to discuss book deals. Documentary filmmakers proposed following her story. Through it all, Maria tried to maintain some semblance of her normal routine. She continued showing up at the community center each morning, cleaning floors and emptying trash cans. But increasingly, her days were interrupted by reporters, photographers, and curiosity seekers who wanted to see the famous mystery boxer in action. The attention reached a crescendo 3 weeks after the fight when Rodriguez himself appeared at the community center, this time alone and much more humble than during his previous visit. Maria was mopping the gymnasium floor when she noticed him standing quietly in the doorway. He had lost the swagger that had defined his earlier appearance, and his expression was thoughtful rather than aggressive. "Can we talk?" he asked simply.
Maria continued mopping, but nodded toward a set of chairs near the wall. "If you want." Rodriguez sat down heavily and was quiet for several minutes, watching Maria work with newfound respect.
When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of its previous arrogance.
I owe you an apology.
A real one, not some public relations nonsense my manager wants me to do for the cameras. Maria paused in her cleaning and looked at him directly.
You don't owe me anything.
You got exactly what you were looking for that night. No, I got what I deserved. But that's not the same thing. Rodriguez leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. I spent that whole night trying to humiliate you, trying to prove that I was better than you because I was bigger and stronger and had more training. And what did you learn?
I learned that strength isn't about size or ego or how loud you can talk. I learned that there are different kinds of power, and the quiet kind might be the most dangerous of all. Maria resumed her mopping but continued listening. I've been boxing professionally for 8 years, Rodriguez continued. I've fought guys from all over the world, won some big fights, made good money, but I've never been in the ring with anyone who carried themselves the way you did that night.
You weren't trying to prove anything to anybody. You were just being who you are. And who am I? Rodriguez thought about that for a moment. Someone who knows the difference between being strong and needing people to think you're strong. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sound being the gentle swish of Maria's mop across the gymnasium floor. Finally, Rodriguez stood up to leave. There's one more thing, he said. All these reporters and promoters who are calling you, they're not wrong about your abilities. What you did to me that night, that wasn't luck or a fluke. That was elite-level boxing skill. If you ever decide you want to step back into that world, you'd have my support. Thank you, Maria said simply. But I'm not sure that world is for me anymore. Rodriguez nodded. Maybe not, but then again, maybe the world needs to change to be worthy of someone like you. After he left, Maria continued cleaning in solitude, thinking about his words and about all the choices that lay ahead of her. The phone calls and interview requests weren't going to stop. The attention wasn't going to fade away. Whether she liked it or not, her secret was out, and there was no going back to the invisible life she had built for herself. But as she worked, Maria realized something had changed in her relationship with the building around her. For 15 years, she had moved through these halls like a ghost, present but unnoticed. Now, every surface she cleaned, every corner she swept, every window she wiped seemed to acknowledge her presence in a way they never had before. She was still Maria Santos, janitor at the downtown community center. But she was also Lightning Vasquez, undefeated professional boxer. And for the first time in over 2 decades, those two identities didn't seem to be at war with each other. The question that remained was what to do with this newfound integration of self. The world was offering her opportunities she had never imagined having again, but the most important opportunity of all was the chance to finally stop hiding from who she really was. Not just the fighter, not just the mother, not just the worker, but all of these things together in one complete, complex, powerful person. As Maria finished her shift and prepared to go home to her apartment, she made a decision. Tomorrow, she would start returning some of those phone calls, not because she wanted to be famous, and not because she needed the money, but because 23 years of silence had been long enough.
It was time for Lightning Vasquez to speak.
A simple woman faced ridicule from a boxer twice her size, then revealed her strength in silence.